Welcome to the Strategic Energy Group Building Operator Smart Series. This is part 1 of our 8-part series, Top 5 Equipment Scheduling Strategies. And for additional energy-reducing tips in your buildings, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. My name is Scott Legge, and I'm an energy coach with Strategic Energy Group. These 4 items are widely recognized as top areas of savings opportunities in existing buildings: equipment scheduling, appropriate use of outside air, simultaneous heating and cooling, and sensor calibration. You may have noticed that all 4 of these involve only the HVAC systems. And while lighting systems oftentimes have significant energy savings opportunities, we find most lighting issues and opportunities tend to be more easily recognized and therefore more readily addressed. Yet the HVAC systems generally exist out of sight and tend to be more complicated and more difficult to understand. As a result, HVAC savings opportunities are largely unrecognized and frequently overlooked. In this video, I'll discuss the dynamics associated with schedules and equipment scheduling opportunities, as well as optimal start, morning warm-up, and why this strategy reduces energy use. Let's look at how a typical commercial building uses energy. On the left, this section contains loads mostly related to the occupants in the building. As a building operator, you'll likely have very little opportunity to impact consumption here. You can see how external and internal lighting loads take almost a quarter of the building's energy, although lighting loads have been shrinking over the past years, as many buildings have been upgraded to more efficient LED technology. On the right side here are the loads from heating, cooling, and ventilation, HVAC or HVAC. Now let's look at what loads facilities managers and building operators can more readily influence. It's typically 3/4 of the whole pie here that you have the ability to impact, and up to 1/2 of it is just HVAC. So you can see why we like to recommend focusing attention on HVAC and controls when looking for energy savings opportunities. We find that most buildings are capable of using less energy with little to no impact on the occupants or productivity. We often see 5 to 15% savings within the first year or two of using the 4 common opportunities. Now that we understand where most of your energy is being used, you can focus on optimizing your systems. And one of the easiest ways to save energy is to simply turn off the equipment when it isn't needed. And we can do that by effective scheduling of the equipment operating times, with the goal of minimizing our on time and maximizing our off time. Additionally, longer operating hours actually cost more money by shortening equipment life and incurring higher maintenance costs. Scheduling is often the largest savings opportunity, and it's very important to periodically review the current occupancy needs for the building and then compare that to the equipment schedules currently being used. Occupancy needs of buildings often change. Sometimes those changes will require longer equipment run times, so don't overlook an opportunity to cut back on operating schedules, even if it's for only a few minutes. One of your first steps should be to review what hours that the building is currently occupied. This means when the majority of occupants actually begin to arrive. That will determine the beginning occupancy time. This checklist shows a few ideas for identifying the current occupancy patterns. And consider each day of the week individually, because the daily hours of occupancy for Monday through Friday may not always be the same. Also look at the different areas of the building for additional scheduling. Maybe some areas can have their HVAC started later than others or shut down earlier. And don't ignore what might seem like a small savings opportunity, such as reducing run time by 15 minutes or so. It may not sound like much, but it can certainly add up over time. And don't overlook weekend operations. It's common for commercial building HVAC equipment to be scheduled to run on Saturdays, for example, but it's best to check on this periodically to see if it's still needed. Also, is it needed to run every weekend or only occasionally? And for dealing with intermittent occupancy needs, Installing occupancy override switches can be a very effective way to minimize after-hours heating and cooling without having to frequently modify or extend the standard schedules. Occupancy override switches are designed to bring the HVAC systems on after hours, but only temporarily for a preset amount of time. When the timer runs out, the HVAC goes back to its normal unoccupied settings. If the occupant is still there and needs more time, they'll just need to get up and push the button again. Now, once you've determined what the occupancy schedules currently are, we recommend you document them and gain approval that these are the times that the HVAC and lighting will be made available. This will also represent the occupancy times for the building. Knowing the occupancy time is very important because that's when the air handler systems need to begin bringing in outside air for ventilation purposes. The cost of conditioning outside air for ventilation can be a significant portion of the energy bills. And we're going to go into detail about the use of outside air later in this series. Let's talk about equipment schedules now. Whether you have a state-of-the-art building automation system, an older pneumatic control system, programmable stats, or even simple time clock controls, it's very important to check and verify what the actual operating schedules for the building's equipment are currently set for. Depending on how comprehensive or rudimentary the control systems are, it may involve checking in multiple locations. It's handy to have a list or a map of the facility with their locations shown to help ensure that you've checked all the programmable stats or time clocks, and you want to be on the lookout for opportunities to trim back runtime whenever possible. In general, you just want to make sure that you're going to start equipment no earlier than necessary and stop that equipment as soon as the occupant's day is over. This is why it's important to know what the building occupant schedules are. After this video, I highly encourage you to check and confirm what the current schedules for the HVAC and lighting in your building are set for. You may be surprised. We recommend setting up pre-scheduled work orders in your PM system to regularly review, verify, and update any changing equipment schedules. These should be scheduled on a quarterly basis at a minimum. And don't overlook holidays as a savings opportunity. We also recommend creating a pre-scheduled work order to annually set up all observed holidays for the year. You know, the days when the building should be vacant and no equipment should be needed to run. In addition to setting up holidays and standard operating schedules, you next need to consider how your facility deals with any occasional temporary scheduling event needs. Some buildings see occasional need to temporarily change the standard operating schedules due to a special event, meeting, or other activities. Whatever the reason, when setting up equipment schedules for temporary events, do not use the weekly scheduler. They're likely to be forgotten. Most building automation systems have a form of temporary event scheduler, and this is the tool to use for these occasions, as it's designed to execute once for a specific date and period of time, and then go back to the normal schedule. Now, since managing these different modes of scheduling can be a bit complex, we also recommend assigning scheduling change responsibility, as well as scheduling access capability, to one primary operator and a backup person. So when we discuss startup times for HVAC equipment, we need to take into account the fact that most buildings will need some extra time to get the building spaces warmed up or cooled down to their occupied set point each morning. Typically, your HVAC equipment needs to start a bit earlier than the occupied time. Remember, the occupied time is the time that you've identified as being when the majority of occupants begin to arrive. And it's important to note here there's a distinct difference between the time that the HVAC equipment needs to start in order to get the spaces to set point and the time that's been identified as when occupancy begins. The equipment start time will almost always be before the occupancy time, and the amount of time between the two is called the early start time. It's the amount of time that the equipment will need to start early, and it will vary seasonally as well as day to day depending on the outside air temperatures. Now, many savvy building operators understand this, and they adjust the HVAC equipment start times seasonally to try and match the early start period to the seasonal temperature swings. Now, this is a step in the right direction, but there's a much better way to achieve a comfortable building by occupancy time while still eking out greater savings on a daily basis. And it's called Optimal Start. This is an algorithm built into most modern automation systems that's designed to automatically adjust and minimize the daily early start period needed each morning. Colder mornings will require an earlier start, while milder mornings will require less. Some days may require no early start time at all. And by automatically readjusting this daily, it will provide much tighter early start control and can be a significant energy saver over the long term. We are occasionally asked, isn't it less expensive to run the building all night rather than to have to use a lot of energy heating it up every morning? And generally speaking, the answer is no, it isn't. Utilizing night setback control, or also called night low limit, offers a good trade-off as it maximizes your off time while not letting the building's mass get too cold during the night, which could otherwise require extended warm-up periods. And by keeping things off as much as possible, it allows savings to accrue all night long. Although there may be a few brief periods of operation needed to keep the building from dropping below the night low limit set point. 55 to 60 is a typical night low limit setting. And most systems will also have a night high limit that will function to bring the HVAC on after hours if the building temperature gets too high during the summer. 80 to 85 degrees are typical night high limit settings. Now, most BAS have optimal start, warm-up mode, and night setback capability built into them. We highly encourage all of you to utilize these features. Nevertheless, you will still want to confirm that they're actually enabled for operation and set up to operate properly. Each air handler needs to have its own optimal start time and warm-up parameters set up properly in order to function optimally. Frequently, I see these energy-saving features installed and enabled, but when we look at the trend logs, we see they're not just working properly. More often than not, it's because they've never been tuned or set up properly with the actual parameters for the building and or the systems that they're controlling. While this should be a function that takes place during the installation and commissioning of any new control systems, you may never know what your systems are doing unless you actually go out and check each of these air handlers' operations to see what they're doing. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video helps you find savings opportunities in your buildings. I hope you watch the rest of the videos in our Building Operator Smart series as well. And for additional energy reducing tips in your buildings, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button.